colleagues. Catherine is from CDLC Communication, and she will be coaching us on communication for supply chain success. Don't we all want to be successful? So that's exactly what Catherine's coaching is. Within 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes. It's 12:44, Catherine, and I am not going to interrupt you. And afterwards, I'm going to switch off my video and only your face will be there. When you see my face coming up, you must know that you only have 1 minute remaining. There we start. Communication for supply chain success. Thank you, Catherine. You can hit it.
Great. Thank you so much. Lebo, can everyone hear me?
Don't worry, everyone can hear you. 5 minutes. The clock is ticking. You unmute, Catherine. You see, when you're talking about when you put under pressure, then that 5 minutes really takes everything away. So Catherine, so it's 12:45, let's say it's 12:46. I'm giving you just 1 minute. You start from scratch, 5 minutes, then you can proceed. All right, if you can please unmute now.
Thank you, Lebo. So today I'm going to be sharing some tips with you, practical tips on good communication within the supply chain. Because when you look at what goes wrong in supply chains, most of the time it comes down to communication issues. There are miscommunications, unclear communications, inconsistent communication, slow communication, or sometimes there's just no communication at all. So today I'm going to share with you 6 tips. So tip number 1, be concise and clear in your communication. And by that, I mean, people don't have time these days to read long documents with fancy words. People want short, sharp, impactful documents. They have short attention spans. So when you communicate, use short sentences, not long ones. Try not to waffle and include irrelevant information. Keep it short and sharp. A very good way to check your communication is to use a voice facility. So I've recently discovered in Word, you can actually type something up and Word will read it back to you. And that is such a valuable way of hearing how your communication actually sounds. Tip number 2, be consistent. Consistency is key. Everyone I've worked with knows how strong I am on this. You need to be consistent in everything you do. The messages you put out, the consistency of the communication, how frequently you communicate, how you communicate, which communication channels you use, the type of images that you use. It needs to be consistent because that creates a perception and that is how you build your brand. Tip number 3, humanize your communication process. You and your business are about creating an experience for your customers, for your suppliers, and really it's about building long-term relationships. So interact with your stakeholders, engage with them, be transparent, and connect with them to build long-term relationships and stay in touch. It comes back to the consistency element. You need to be in front of your customers and your suppliers on a regular basis. Tip number 4, be proactive and practice active listening. Transparency is key. Communication is a two-way process. Ask questions when people send you communications or talk to you so that you really can understand what they are wanting from you. How many times have you found yourself responding to a question in your mind before that person has actually finished asking the question? So we're not very good at listening to people. We need to build up our skills in that area. Tip number 5. Be proactive, not reactive. Don't wait for a crisis to start communicating with your stakeholders or suppliers. Share information with people on a regular basis. Keep people up to date with the changes in your company, maybe the changes with your product or your systems or your processing. Keep your clients up to date. Regular, ongoing communication really is key. And also, the last tip is incorporate technology. Today, there are so many apps out there, devices, really a lot of apps and technologies that make communication very easy, make communication far more transparent, which helps in building relationships and along the supply chain. See what's out there, constantly learn and stay up to date with the technologies, new innovations. There are some very bright, talented people out there constantly updating products, coming in with new thinkings, insights, and innovations. And generally, the technology is very easy to use. So there's no excuse for not embracing technology. Finally, just in summary, communication is verbal, it's visual. Everything you say, everything you do, everything you write creates a perception, creates your brand, whether it's your own personal brand or your company brand. So just be aware that everything has an impact, whether you're posting a tweet on Twitter or commenting on LinkedIn. People build up a perception of you, but it is important to be out there and communicate on an ongoing basis with your stakeholders.
All right, Catherine, 12:51.
So how many minutes was that? Did I go over?
12:51. I hope everyone is also observing. I've given them a task that's 5 minutes. So I think Catherine has already nailed it, on the dot. She's talking about communication. Are you struggling with communicating your vision in supply chain? Are you, do people don't even understand you when you are really trying to put a point across and people do not understand you, or people just lose interest along the way? Remember, in supply chain, colleagues, we really need to drive the advocacy. That means you have to be vocal. You have to write. You have to make sure that different ways of communications happen. So Catherine is telling us we have to be consistent. We need to make sure that we change the perception. Is around being verbal as well, creativity as well. We must create our brand, because all of this, how we communicate, is around creating our own brands. So any of you, any questions to Catherine around that, around communication? Because remember, if we get our communication wrong, then everything is just messed up. So Catherine, communicating for success, we are done with your 5 minutes. At a high level, without explaining, what are those 5 areas? Consistency, if you can just repeat them.
Yes, so it's clarity and consistency. So clarity, consistency, humanizing, being human, developing relationships, listening, really listening to what people are asking and wanting. What are their needs? We really need to understand that. Be proactive and use tech. Embrace the change.
Embrace the change, colleagues. You got that. Catherine, thank you so much. You had your 5 minutes, and then I prepared to go to the next speaker. So those are the tips, colleagues, from Catherine. Focus on clarity and consciousness. Keep communicating and being consistent. Humanize your brand. Listen proactively. Be proactive and not reactive. Those are your tips, colleagues, in communicating for supply chain success. Then we move to the next coach. The clock is ticking. Can we see the clock again as the next coach gets on board? So, colleagues, if you have any questions on coaching, on mentorship as well, the clock is ticking again. So after Catherine, our next coach is, let's look at this, is Kia Mbani. She is a supply chain influencer. Kia, where are you? So she will be coaching on self-mastery to achieving supply chain excellence. Kia, I think all of us, we want to grow. So how do we achieve excellence? That's self-mastery skills that are needed. And I think we were talking about earlier with Maria as part of the keynote around growing mentality and the growth mindset that is needed as well in our industry. And right now we are saying that there's self-mastery skills that are needed to achieve supply chain excellence. So it's 12:55 here, 12:55, meaning that you have 5 minutes to follow. Catherine, let's see if you'll be able to beat Catherine in terms of the time. You'll be able to stick, to the time. Kia is a supply chain influence, previous president with SAPEX, and Kia will be taking us on the next coaching session. Kia, you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes to go. So the clock is starting.
Thank you, Lebo. I think I'm very privileged to be joining everyone on this session. Definitely, I'll try to beat my time of 5 minutes or Catherine's time of 5 minutes. Self-mastery. This is a very soft, hard topic to be talking about. It's hard in the sense that we're talking about managing yourself. Before you can expect to manage and lead others, you need to be able to know how to manage yourself. So let's just start with it. The route to professional excellence, as I always refer, lies in character. We employ character, we employ attitude, we employ discipline. So if you were to look that the future of supply chain is that of agility, is that of resilience, is that of purpose-driven. This then calls for the professionals that are intentful in their conduct, to be able to manage, to be able to lead, to be able to execute, to be able to operate the ethical supply chain, as I may term that. So let's now talk about the underlying you. You have all the qualifications, you have maxed up all the curriculum, right? Yet you are struggling with the necessary professional proficiency that is required to execute. So look no further. It starts within, it starts with you. I think my son likes doing this to me all the time, to say when he's actually not happy with me. So it starts with you as an individual. So the key to mastery in anything that you do, it requires you to practice in anything. The more you practice, the more proficient you actually become. So let's start. We talk about awareness. Know yourself, your pros, your cons. Self-mastery is often defined as a self-control. Do you have the self-control to be able to manage yourself? Self-mastery requires having a vision for your future self. Display the authentic you every time when you appear into the world. To be true not only to your words and not only to your actions, but to be honest with yourself. To what I refer under the self, it is the choices and discernment. To discern is to be able to choose wisely. Choose wisely. Conscious choice maker. You need to be aware that there are choices and then choose consciously when you do that. Being aware of this will protect you against any temptation in the world of supply chain as you know it. Thirdly, decisions, actions, and focus. Have the courage to act on your choices. The ego is always waiting to distract you as you get more powerful, as you get up the ranks in your profession. The ego will distract you. So don't listen to the noise vibrations around you. It requires you to stay alert, unemotional. It requires you to actually be mature, to be firm without oppression, to be resolved without judgment, to be strong, to be able to have the humility. Fourthly, under self, we look at the realization and the manifestation. What do we mean by that? Remember, you radiate light and divinity for all to enjoy. Your actions are spontaneously in alignment with the natural law. So you fully awake, they are present. Pure consciousness, truth, humble, ubuntu, ubuntu. You command the light, fulfilling promise of your destiny. That's what I referred to the contentment. So let's now look at the second aspect. The second aspect of the self-mastery after the self is your conduct. This is the manner in which you behave, the manner in which you carry yourself. This is how you guide, how you steer, how you direct within your own supply chain. We look at the mindset, the respect, the authenticity, and we look at your attitude. Why does mindset matter? The mindset matters because of your mindset is a set of a belief system that shape you and that help you to make sense of the world and yourself. Your mindset plays a critical role in how you cope with life changes. Remember, within supply chain, there's a lot of constant changes that are always happening. You need to be able to learn to be able to adjust all the time. Respect, having due regard for the right of others, regarding someone well for their qualities and for their traits. Be it those that you manage, be it those that lead you, those that manage you. The action of treating people with appreciation and with dignity. You can never command respect. Respect is earned. So a professional, respectful work culture encourages productivity and growth within the supply chain. We look at authenticity. With authenticity, like I mentioned earlier, be you, be genuine, be real. Avoid mimicking and copycatting bad leadership, because of a lot of us are aspiring to bad leaders that are of either bullying in the workplace or that are oppressing individuals. That is not leadership. Be you, representing one's true nature or a belief system. Thirdly, or lastly, we look at that at attitude. The attitude being both how you appear, how you act, how you actually extend yourself. This is basically your street creed. So let's go back. We are saying in order for you to be able to start mastering how you manage yourself, character building, look within yourself, carry yourself, conduct yourself, be sure, be confident, check and reflect and inspire. These last three, we're going to look at them tomorrow's session. So for today, we are saying, look within yourself as an individual, be sure about who you are in order for you to be able to build your character. Thanks, Lebo.
Well, Gia, you see, I thought that, in between this whole process, and I'm just trying to see who's really going beyond the board. Seems like we say, supply chain, we are always on time. 5 minutes is exactly what we got out of you. Colleagues, you had that, building your self-mastery. We spoke around the self-awareness, look at discernment, mindset, character that needs to be built. Ethical consideration in supply chain is part of the excellence that we are building in supply chain. Respect, attitude, all of that really boils up to us as individuals in supply chain management. And we are continuing with that additional 5 minutes in terms of that coaching tomorrow on other areas in terms of inspiring and reviewing as well. So Kia, thank you so much. Colleagues, if you have any questions for Kia, you are all being challenged in all aspects, from your technical understanding and supply chain, but also individually, yourself as professionals, as to what softer skills are needed coming from yourself to be able to succeed. So key notes from those questions: character building, in terms of excellence, look within yourself, carry yourself as well. Be sure, check in and inspire. That's coming through tomorrow, because we also have to make that difference in the industry. So thank you so much, Kia, for joining us for this as we prepare, as the clock continues ticking for our next coach. Colleagues, we've already had the coaching from Kia, but also from Catherine. Like I said, Kia is in global supply chain at this point in time, an influencer, and we had Catherine already, who is a communicator in supply chain management. So she spoke to us around communication for success. So Sizwe, are you ready? Kia, thank you so much for joining us. I think you can switch off your video. All right, Sizwe, are you ready? So Sizwe is talking to us, colleagues now, around stakeholder relationships in terms of how we leverage such relationships for us to be successful, because in supply chain, we have to build relationships. So the question is, how do we leverage that? What tips have you got, Sizwe, for all the supply chain professionals out there, business out there, in terms, or even a supplier out there who wants to leverage the relationships with ourselves, because at the end of the day, we have an integrated ecosystem. So 5 minutes is 13:05. I think I've taken a couple of your seconds, so I will consider that. Then you can start with your coaching. But quickly, let me just introduce also Sizwe is also a supply chain professional in the industry. Has always been in the food services, has been in mining and FMCG. So Sizwe, you know the value of building those relationships and stakeholders, gaining the favor through our stakeholders. You can hit it in terms of the coaching. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lebu. Thank you, everyone. And thank you very much for the invite to be one of the coaches. Learning in progress. So yeah, Lebu, leveraging stakeholders has always been important for me to navigate through the business. The point number one is know them. Know those individuals that are powerful within the business. Understand the environment that you're working with. In that, it will help you to understand how you engage with them. Secondly, engage rather than manage. Before you can do anything, have an open communication with your stakeholders. In that sense, it will make you to rather manage the situation at hand and also have the influence of the right people to assist you to navigate through the challenges within supply chain. Do not wait until the situation is out of control before you engage with them. Thirdly is always have possible solution to navigate the challenges. Stakeholders always wants to know what is the benefit for them to assist you. So when you go to them and saying this, I'm having a challenge with the delivery stuck in China, what is that you're doing in the meantime? Advise them, be the person that you advise them to navigate, to say, for us to be able to manage the situation, these are the process steps that we need to follow. The benefit for the business will be that there will not be any production losses or there won't be any shutdown for the plant. I'm talking with that because I'm coming through from the manufacturing experience. Okay. Fourthly is to align the proposal with the business objective when engaging with the stakeholders. Then it will be easier for them to say yes to what you're proposing to them. So in that regard, it's always important to manage those expectations with your stakeholders. And then the fifth one and the last one is be informed to inform others. Always be in the know. If there's anything happening within the country, within the world, in the business, you must be the first to inform your stakeholders. And also be receptive to the information that you're receiving outside from the outside market. Suppliers, they will always move mountains for them. Be the first person to pick up the call to say, what is happening? What do I need to know? How can I come across the stumbling block within the supply chain in my organization? So it always boils down to engagement, communication, alignment with your stakeholders. Thank you, Lebo.
Wow! 13:08. We started at 13:05. Sizwe. Who's going to beat Sizwe now? Straight to the point. We said, let's cut to the chase. Sizwe has told us around leveraging stakeholder relationships within how many minutes? 4 minutes. No, 3.5 minutes, in fact, to be exact. Hey, so you did it. Thank you, Cynthia. So Cynthia, tell us, as it is now, we have to leverage stakeholder relationship. That's what you say. We as supply chain professionals, we work within a supply chain, within the value chains of organization. We have to build the relationships. So what you say is that get to know your stakeholders, do your stakeholder mapping. It's very important to understand the environment you're working in and what drives the people. And it will help with your strategy and how you engage going forward. You must engage rather than managing as well, because in so many times we always want to say thou shalt, because there is a policy and procedure, but it's very important as well that we engage with our stakeholders. And also it helps us and help our stakeholders get to understand the processes, understand what supply chain does, and they understand the supply chain language. We must be open communication with the stakeholders, the influencers in the organization. Do not wait until situations are out of control before you engage. Always have possible solutions to navigate the challenges. We are very innovative in supply chain, so we should. That will show that you are not only bringing the problem, but you proactively assist in finding possible solves. Stakeholders always want to know, what have you got for me? What is the solution out there? So you must also align with the proposals, with the business object and values when engaging with the stakeholders. Be informed, be informed, be informed, and inform others. That's how you leverage on stakeholder relationships. How do you manage your relationships, colleagues? I'm really wondering, does it work for you? How do you really build your mastery skills? How do you communicate for success in your business? Have you got tips out there that we have not shared with the previous 3 coaches? Sizwe, thank you so much for sharing that. That's Sizwe Laka. She is a supply chain professional, having been in the FMCG, the mining industry, the food services as well. She has shared the tips on how we engage with the stakeholders, our suppliers, our internal stakeholders as well. As we move forward, the clock is going to start ticking again. And what I said, this is speed coaching. If you do have a question or you want to share your insight in any of those 3 areas, please type them in terms of the chat box, because we are cutting to the chase, and what we are doing straight to the point already. That's what we are sharing with yourself. Now, let me introduce our next coach. So our next coach is Mary Ganda. So Mary Ganda, is it Mary or Tebogo? Looks like I'm getting it wrong here. It's Mary. Oh, it's Tebogo. Looks like it's Tebogo. I'm looking at my notes here. My apologies.
I think it's Tebogo.
Well, you've already showed your face. And so let me just look at the profile here. So now our next coach now that is coming up is Tebogo Morumani. So Tebogo will be talking to us around demand management and supply planning. Tebogo, are you ready? I think in any organization's colleagues, we know when it comes to planning, it's always a failure in most organizations that when you sit in supply chain, you are at the end of the leg. And we understand that people do not plan properly in terms of what they want to procure. They do not manage, the requirements of the business as well. So how do we ensure that we do proper demand management and supply planning in the organization? Tebogo is 13-12 right now. So let me tell you about Tebogo. When you talk about transitioning, let me tell you about Tebogo just a bit. She's a finance person, but she ended up in supply chain, by the way. So this is what I love about supply chain, that everyone will start transitioning and now she's a seasoned supply chain professional now. Finance is now on the backbone of what she has been doing for years. She has got more experience now in supply. She's a professional for the past 28 years, having been in, and I always say that she's a a demand management guru. According to me, based on the work that she has done previously. So Tebogo is 13-13. Like I said, I show my face, you must know that it's time to wrap up. 5 minutes for you is 13-13. Let's talk about demand planning and demand management.
Thank you. Thank you, Lebu. And thank you for the invite. Yeah, 5 minutes will not be enough, I know, to talk about demand planning and supply planning, but that is the first step in the procurement process. And we all know that it should not be a one-man show. And when I say one-man show, it's not about supply chain. It's about your stakeholders, your end users, and it's a collaborative exercise that is done under the leadership of supply chain management. And the third issue is that it informs financial budgets. How many times have we had that projects have overrun or projects don't have money, and you know, projects are left standing because there was not enough money that was budgeted for that? It is because the demand planning and the supply planning was not done properly. The other thing also about demand management is that it helps the buyers to understand the business in which they operate and the markets in which they operate in. It makes them understand their suppliers, their end users, the business in which where they are employed, they are operating. It also assists us with knowing the constraints, to be able for us to do proper resource planning in terms of man hours, in terms of money, in terms of who is more suited to run with any category that we would have identified in the demand management. Demand management also is about consolidating resources, about consolidating the requirements of the business. In that way, it informs category management, and it helps to us to identify the risks that are there with our suppliers, because if we know what we want to procure, then we will do an analysis of our suppliers that are out there, and we will know who our suppliers are, the capability of our suppliers, and also whether our suppliers will be able to service us or not. It will also inform us about our inventory. You know, we know that we don't want to keep stock because stock is money. We want to keep as little stock as possible to ensure that we do not have working capital sitting idly in the stores. Yeah, and also it assists us to mitigate the risks that we would have identified during the planning stages of both demand and supply planning. I know that in the FMCGs have done this properly, the best way, and in public sector we are still struggling to get to grips with how to do demand management and supply planning. And there are certain methods that can be used. You can use constant growth, you can use moving averages, or you can use regressions. There are so many methods and or techniques that are out there that can be used in the demand planning and supply planning. Lebu, thank you. I think I hope that I did not overrun.
Deborah, we started from 1313 and it's 1317. I'm always laughing because when I look at people's comments, we have their accountants on board. And some of the accountants are reminding me that it's not 3 minutes, it's 3 minutes and how many more seconds? If I remember the numbers. So from 1313 to 1318, someone can start counting there that how many minutes has Teboho did she beat Sizwe in terms of the time. We're talking about demand management and supply planning. We are saying that failing to plan is planning to fail. It's exactly that. That's what Teboho is telling us. And in supply chain, if you are not able to plan, because that's where it all starts. The first step to any procurement is planning in terms of the requirements. That is why we have procurement plans. We have our resources planning as well. So that's where it all starts. The first step in any procurement is planning. It's a cross-functional exercise. So if you're out there, you're an engineer, you're a CEO, you're a CFO, and you're really just thinking that supply chain has to do it on their own. No. it is an integrated approach that requires cross-functional support. The third part, we must always remember that it informs financial budgets as well. So any budgeting that happens in the organization, I think earlier we spoke about how much procurement is spending in terms of the total numbers of the business. It helps buyers to understand the business as well as the markets they operate in. So it also informs supply chain professionals of constraints, risks, and how to mitigate them. So colleagues, are you struggling with planning? Are you struggling with your budget? Are you struggling with this process along the way that someone comes and tell you that this must happen? Part of the planning, which I must remind you, is that you need to start enforcing with your colleagues, the engineers out there, to share with you the technical plans going forward, so that if it is a 3-year technical plan, you know exactly how you need to buy. You have to start thinking around the plant modifications if you're in warehousing. To start thinking of the inventory that you need to store as well, so that if it's not there, it's on consignment, or you need to procure, it must kick back to real procurement. So demand management and supply planning is very crucial in the supply chain environment. Always remember that. If you have some challenges, always step back and make sure that you start asking the right questions in your businesses. Deborah, thank you so much for sharing your insight, colleagues. Like I said, Deborah is the supply chain professional. She is a demand management guru in the industry. So now, as we move to our last coach, Mary Franda. Mary, where are you?
I'm here, Lebo. How are you?
Can you hear the click? The clock is ticking for you, eh?
Yeah.
So colleagues, we're talking about just about everything, end-to-end supply chain, from procurement to softer skills that are really supporting us. That's what we are talking about. And we are now getting to the freight perspective. We are the logisticians out there, logistics managers. We have commodity specialists already that are focusing on logistics, and most of the time, and we're talking about optimization, Mary, earlier, and the question that that kept on coming up, and also when we were sharing the trends, was around how do we optimize, how do we cut, we save costs as well for the businesses. So we really want to make sure that you provide the tips to negotiating the maritime freight rates. It's one of this, environment in maritime. I always say that we don't always have a leeway. That's my perception. So maybe you will prove me wrong, but I always say that when it comes to maritime freight rates, especially from the South African perspective, where we don't have that flag of a South African ship, we are now on the back burner when it comes to maritime. So colleagues, before Mary joins us, as a coach, before we start with her, I would like to have the panelists, some of the panelists that are remaining, and also the coaches that are remaining. When I'm done with when one of the video has played, please stay behind. And for everyone that is attending, if you have some questions, please just start sending your questions on the chat box, because I want to allow just about all of you, if you need some area, this area, some clarity, you want to ask some questions, please start typing them in, so that before we close our session today, preparing for tomorrow, then we address some of the questions from the dialogue that we had since this morning until this afternoon. So Mary is our last coach for today. Mary, let's see what the time is. It's 13:23. Tips to negotiating maritime freight rates.
Okay, thanks, Lebo. I think first, before you start negotiating a freight rate, you need to know exactly what you're purchasing. So, whether it's a product or a service. And with maritime freight, you're literally just purchasing space on a specific vessel for a specific route, really. So when you actually look at that, then you start looking at who can actually supply that product or service that you want to purchase. So you'll find a few different shipping lines who may be offering the same services, and you can start looking at those shipping lines and doing some research. The first thing you need to do is actually assess the supplier offers. So based on price, customer service, reliability, transit time, finance terms. So when you're looking at freight, you're not just looking at the ocean freight. I mean, you may have bunker adjustment factor. There's a whole lot of different types of freight that's involved. Some may offer an all-in rate. So you really need to actually understand the prices that you are getting. And if you don't understand, Google can help. The next thing is the customer service, and we all know there is a customer service issue with shipping lines. But at the end of the day, when you have a problem, do you have somebody that you can pick up the phone and call? If things don't go right. So these are the things you need to think about beyond just the freight rate and beyond just the price. Reliability. We know shipping lines have omitted ports in Durban, ports in South Africa, including Durban. So what happens once they are met? Because some of these things they don't have control over. Some they do, and going back to customer service, are those being communicated? Transit time, basically looking at how long it takes to get your cargo from A to B. So some shipping lines may have different transit times depending on the route. Finance terms, some shipping lines may offer you a credit agreement for 30 days or 7 days. And this may help with getting your cargo released, in a hurry where you don't have to worry about, immediately paying and waiting for that payment to reflect and so on. So when you're looking at the supplier, you have to look at them holistically and look at, what do they really offer and what are their service levels are, at really. Then you need to assess your position as a customer. What are you bringing to the supplier? Are you, bringing a high volume of cargo? Are you offering a long-term relationship, or is it just a one-off transaction? Because if you know where you're coming from, then you know how much of bargaining power you really have when dealing with the supplier. And obviously, the more volume you are offering, the bigger your bargaining power is. And, they'll literally come to you. But at the end of the day, you need to know what you're bringing to the table and not just assume that, yes, you're a customer and yes, you can negotiate and you'll get the best rate. That's not always the case. Shipping lines assess their customers based on volume and obviously long-term relationships as well. Then you prioritize your requirements. So, sometimes price may not be the most important thing to you because you may be importing raw materials for manufacturing. And in that case, you'd rather have reliability than the lowest price. So look at it from that perspective where you are looking at it holistically, what can actually help you and your customers or the manufacturers, and what's most important to them. So prioritizing your requirements is a very important part because then you can really go back and assess what a supplier is offering. And then you can even give points to each requirement that you have. So price is, your number one requirement, give it 10 points. Customer service is not that important to you, or you don't mind dealing with online, sending in your tickets and getting a response about it and so on. So depending on your priorities in your business, you can assess the supplier offers based on that. And, you can actually contact, whether it's shipping lines or freight forwarders or trucking companies, contact a few, look at what they can offer, look at, for shipping lines, look at how many ships that they've got, how reliable are they calls, are they doing weekly calls, monthly calls, and look at what works for you. Because if your cargo doesn't get onto a vessel, within shipping, there's been a lot of short shipments over the years. If it doesn't get onto a vessel, what's the next step? Do they have a vessel coming in the week afterwards? So you really need to understand the shipping side of things before you start negotiating, because, if you negotiate with shipping line A and you tell them, okay, shipping line B has given me this price, can you meet that? Some cases they'll say yes, in other cases they'll say no. So ultimately, you have to know who they are. You have to know what your priorities are. And the main point is, don't be afraid to negotiate. Don't be afraid to ask for a lower price. The worst thing that can happen is someone can tell you no. Thank you.
All
Lebo, I
right.
think you muted.
Yes. Thank you, Mary, for that. Like I said, one area which is most difficult for a lot of people, it's really around maritime. And the truth is, I want to see more women in the maritime environment, either from the business perspective and also from professionalism as well. And as I think as supply chain professionals in general, we want to see ourselves winning when it comes to negotiating in terms of the freight rates and so forth. So the key insights coming from what Mary is saying, that we need to assess the supplier offers based on the price, customer service delivery, reliability, transit time, and finance terms. Assess our position, position of customer, volume of businesses as well, long-term relationships that we are also building around it. Prioritize the requirements and make sure that you assess supplier offers based on the requirements, and never be afraid to ask for a lower price. It doesn't matter what. If you feel that you want a lower price, ask for that lower price as a professional. Mary, thank you for sharing that insight in terms of negotiating on the maritime freight rates. Now, as we wrap up our coaching cycle, I would love to request all the coaches to show their faces on the screen. Everyone, if you can just show your faces on the screen. And as we do that, I'm not sure if there are any questions, because I want us, to have a final one-liner for each and every coach in terms of really giving you the last advice in terms of supply chain from the coaching perspective, so that we can wrap up the coaching sessions. So I will start first, with yourself, Catherine. What is the last advice from the coaching perspective that you can give to the professionals?
I would say communicate with passion, communicate with intent, and let your passion for supply chain come through. It goes a long way to creating successful communication in the supply chain.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. Gia?
I think for me, Lepo, is that the art to be able to know how to manage and to treat people in order for them to be able to exude confidence. It starts with managing yourself. Nothing else. It starts with yourself. Know and be content. When you're content with yourself, when you're resolute about who you are, you're never going to get tempted. We know that the environment that we deal with in supply chain is very sensitive. So therefore, it requires grounded individuals that should be conducting our ethical supply chains.
All right. Thank you, Kia. Siziwe?
Okay, so Lebo for me is have the right attitude. Working with people, I always say that procurement or any other supply chain function is the support or the backbone of the business. So you need to be humble, you need to be available, you need to be action orientated. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you, Siziwe. Tebogo? Tebogo, you're muted.
Sorry about that. For me, it's the issue that you cannot control what you can't measure. And therefore, if you can't measure your performance, or if you can't control your performance, you can't measure it. That is why we have demand planning and supply planning, because we need to be able to be measured as supply chain professionals by our end users and the business on the business objectives that have been set at the beginning of the year, or be it long-term for, a period of 5 years or so. So you cannot control what you can't measure.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And then there's some few questions that are also coming through here. There's two questions. I think one is around how can stakeholder engagement be improved? That is the one question that has come through. And then the other question speaks to how can we curb or work around the vast increase in freight charges recently rising, which also affect overall cost with the importing and exporting. So Mary, I think it speaks to yourself because this creates tension with the ongoing price increases. So I think if you can address the first question, Sizwe, on the stakeholder engagement, how can stakeholder engagement be improved according to you?
Okay, so there's few things that one needs to do when you mapping your stakeholders. Understand them, understand where they fit into the business, and always understand that the dynamic changes every day. So the stakeholder that you map that is just they keep me informed, it may be a stakeholder that needs to be involved all the time. So you must always have that mapping tool with you when you're engaging with them. So critical for me is map them, review them all the time. Depending on the nature of challenges you have, they normally change. So you just need to map them correctly and review them all the time. Yeah.
All right. And Mary, on your side?
I think when it comes to the freight rates, I mean, we all know it has increased drastically over the past year, almost making it impossible, to actually book cargo, especially for the smaller shippers. But ultimately, we need to realize that, shipping lines have their freight rates very low for many years, and then a lot of them lost money. There was a lot of consolidation within the industry because of this. Shipping lines closed down, they merged, they were bought off. So, for them, this is a time to make money, but for the customers, it doesn't help anybody with the higher cost. But my advice is just go through the same steps of negotiating, speak to the different shipping lines, see if you can get better rates, because, the higher the rates, the less shippers want to actually ship. This is a simple supply and demand. Yes, we do need the cargo, but, if you find a cheaper shipping line to use it, but obviously there may not always be the reliability. So that is why I always say, prioritize what your needs are, because you may need urgent shipments, but other shipments may not actually be as urgent. So decide on your costs in that way. The other option would be looking at alternatives, whether it's rail, trucking, air freight. With the high shipping line freight rates, it could be a little cheaper if you've got smaller shipments to air freight them. So look at the different options and work on it from there, as I said, based on your priorities.